Welcome, Badger families. My name is Erin Warner, and I'm University Housing's Assistant Director of Off-Campus Housing Services. Thank you for joining me today for this special edition of Badger Family Forum series on helping find a home away from home for your student in 24-25. The Parent and Family Program here at UW-Madison knows this is a popular topic for students and families, so enthusiastically offered to allow us to use this Badger Family Forum platform to share information with all of you. Whether you're joining us live or watching the event at a later time, we appreciate you being here and supporting your student. The transition to a new school year can be both exciting and challenging for students. This transition can sometimes feel more difficult by the pressures students feel to secure housing for the 24-25 school year. Our conversation today will cover the key topics that often arise during the housing hunt, with our goal being to provide students and families with the tips and advice so they can make an informed housing choice for next year. Today, we are joined by both on and off-campus partners who will help address common questions we receive, and they'll share advice on how you can support your students through the housing search. Let me introduce you to our experts. We have Alyssa Lamberton. She is an assignment coordinator with University Housing. She has been in this position for 5 years and works most closely with summer housing management and returning resident process. Alyssa and her colleagues in the assignments office also work with all contracting processes, cancellations, room changes, and general questions that come to our housing email and phone lines. I'd like to introduce you to Joe Biederman. Joe is the Operations Manager and Campus Area Housing Coordinator in the Campus and Visitor Relations Office. Joe enjoys supporting students by sharing information about off-campus housing and the variety of housing options near Madison. Joe is a lifelong Madison resident and a UW-Madison graduate. All right, next I would like to introduce you to Jimena Linares. Jimena is a bilingual housing counselor with the Tenant Resource Center. The Tenant Resource Center is a nonprofit organization that focuses on housing justice through education, referrals, and access to conflict resolution. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Abby Zellner. Abby is the Director of Leasing and Marketing for LZ Management, which operates Grand Central and Exo One Apartments. Abby graduated from UW-Madison in 2016 and is passionate about helping students understand the leasing process and making the best, most informed housing decisions possible. A little bit more about me. For those of you that may not know this about me, in addition to being a Badger staffer, I'm also a mom to 2 current Badgers, a senior and a sophomore. To hopefully relieve some of your stress, neither of my Badgers has signed a lease for next year yet. So if I'm not panicked, you guys shouldn't be panicked. These 4 panelists are experts I trust to guide my own Badgers through the process, and is why I'm thrilled they're able to join us today and help guide your Badgers as well. There's lots of information we want to share today, so let's jump right in. If you have questions during our program today, feel free to submit them to the comment section of Facebook. We have a staff person there on standby to answer questions as they come in or to feed them to our panelists for follow-ups. If we don't cover your question, or if you think of additional questions after we wrap up, please reach out to the Off-Campus Housing Services email, which is on your screen. We'll also share that in the chat. We're here for you and we'd love to help however we can. The first topic I want to cover today is returning to the residence halls. Alyssa, can you walk families through this option for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Erin, for the intro. As Erin mentioned, my name is Alyssa. I work in the assignments office in University Housing. So here to talk a little bit about what our returning student process looks like. So the key thing I do want to be sure to mention is that returning to the residence halls is not guaranteed. So we have a process for you to request to live in the residence halls. It's difficult for us to predict how many students will be offered the chance to live in the residence halls because it is going to depend on that interest. That does fluctuate pretty drastically every single year. So it's all going to depend on our first step of the process. So another important note is that our returning student process can only be a potential for students currently living in the residence hall. So if you are a student currently living off campus, then you would not be eligible to request to live in the residence hall. So this is only to our students currently living with us. So this is on our website, as you can see, go.wis.edu/return. This is a great resource for students and parents to take a look at everything that we have available right now about our returning student process, which will kick off in a little under a month. So if you scroll down on our webpage, there are really helpful details about all of the steps regarding that returning student process. So the steps and dates, really extremely important dates for everyone to know is that notice of intent and roommate selection period that occurs from October 18th, to October 25th. So in that time is when students will go into their MyUW housing portal and just let us know yes or no, am I interested in returning? For those who say no, totally fine. You can go on your way and search for off-campus options, and we will not send any returning student information to you anymore. For those who do indicate yes, that is the group of students that will be considered for potential to select a room. Really important note for roommate selection is that all people who pair up with preferred roommates need to make sure to be in that same group with their preferred roommates. All of that will be explained in your MyUW housing portal. You would need to create roommate groups, and the other students would need to join that group, and then you need to accept the joining of that group. So if you create roommate groups with preferred roommates, by that deadline, then all of you will have the same decision. So you will either say you're in a roommate group of 2, both students will either get a yes, you can select and will get a time slot, or they will get a no, you did not make the cut for that. So as long as you are paired with your preferred roommates, you will get the same decision as your other preferred roommates. So again, really, really firm deadline for that October 25th. If you do not indicate your interest in returning by the 25th, you cannot be considered to return to the residence halls. So once that passes, we move on to our second step of the process, which is going to be that email notification. So by October 30th, we will be sending an email to all students who indicated yes in their notice of intent by that October 25th deadline. And in that email, we'll tell you either yes, you did make it into select a room, and if so, we will give you a time slot of when you can go select that room, or we will say, I'm sorry, you did not get selected for room selection, and then you will automatically be placed on a waiting list. So important thing to know on this, again, there's going to be very firm deadlines for all of this to happen and what your time slot is. And for decision on whether or not you do make it for room selection is entirely randomized. We are going to use a random lottery system, similar to how we do a random lottery system for our first year assignment process. We also do random lottery system for who will get to take part in that room selection process. And then moving on to our next step here is that room selection period. So for students who are selected to take part in room selection, you will get a time slot of either November 1st or 2nd, and we'll have through November 9th to select a room. Anyone who's in a roommate group will have the same time slot as their roommate. Again, this can only happen if you are successfully in that roommate group together. So those steps will occur for selecting the room on your specific time slot. So the group leader is the one to select that room. And once that room selection happens, all students who have selected a room or had a room selected for them will have to go on to the next step, which is to complete the contracting and advance payment part of the process. So in this part of the process, any student who has selected a room, so whether you selected it on your own or your roommate selected a room for you, you are individually responsible for signing the contract and paying the advance payment. Typically, the advance payment is $300, but some students may have a deferral or waiver on file that may lessen that cost a little bit. So really, really important for you to know that once that contract is signed and the advance payment is made, it is a legally binding contract for the entire academic year. We do not release students from the contract to live off campus at any point. And so it is really important that you do not sign that contract and pay the advance payment unless you are 100% certain of your decision to live on campus for the full academic year. So those are really the core steps in our process. So again, key dates, make sure you check those out on our website, that we have that link there for you. And then remember, it is not guaranteed, but you will have a decision by October 30th to let you know whether or not you have been selected to take part in room selection, as long as you do that notice of intent process. So we'll kick things back over to Erin now to go into our next step of the program.
Thanks for the great information, Alyssa. The residence halls are a great option for students. However, many students will still choose to move off a campus after their first year, which leads us to our next topic, which is searching for off-campus housing. This is an area we get questions on daily. And while I'm all about letting our young adult students learn to navigate and be more independent, securing off-campus housing is actually one of the areas I think parents and families can lend some really valuable guidance. Joe, would you mind kicking us off here with some tips and advice for searching for off-campus housing?
Absolutely, and thanks for joining us, everyone. So again, my name is Joe Bierman, and I'm the coordinator with the Campus Area Housing Program here at UW-Madison. I'm going to talk a bit about searching for off-campus housing and just some context around that search, also just some context about renting off-campus in the near Madison and near campus area. So I'm going to first start off with a definition. So what is considered off-campus housing? So off-campus housing is any housing that's owned by a private property manager or a landlord that's not owned by the university is what we define that as. So any housing that is owned by the university we refer to as on-campus housing. So the undergraduate residence halls that we refer to as on-campus housing compared to off-campus housing is just a private apartment that your student is renting from a private landlord or a private property manager. So some good context about that is Madison, our campus, is really large and it's really spread out. And there may be some off-campus properties that are right next to some libraries or some buildings that your student's going to have classes in. So just because they're living in off-campus housing doesn't necessarily mean that they'd have a commute or a long commute to get to any of their classes. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about when to look and what to expect for housing. So just some context about leases in the near campus area is most leases operate on a 12-month August to August lease length. Some start at the beginning of August, some start in the middle of August, but most of those sit in that 12-month time period or those 12-month leases. Now, there may be some shorter 9-month academic year leases available in some properties. If your student needs a really specific, like just a semester or a short-term housing option, there's very limited amount of just semester-only leases that we do see. Subletting as it gets down the road there is a great option for connecting with to find some short-term housing options. But if your student is in that scenario, it's really great for them to contact that off-campus services office and they can connect with us and we can kind of help them navigate their options with that. So already your student may have already started to receive some advertisements from private properties advertising housing for next fall, and that may be creating some pressure for them. So right now, properties are likely connecting with their current tenants, asking if their current tenants would like to renew. So they're checking in on those renewals. And then soon, starting either now or in the next few days or the next coming days or weeks, we will see them release kind of those availabilities out to just new leases for next fall. And so your student is not behind the curve for searching for housing for next fall right now. Really just taking that time to figure out what does your student need. So we see the most amount of listings on our website, which is campusareahousing.wisc.edu. If you've used a apartments.com or like a Zillow or a similar like apartment search resource, this is designed for UW-Madison and has a number of properties in the near Madison area listed on there. We see the most amount of listings for the coming fall, listed between late September and January. So right now we're kind of just at the beginning of that. Like I said, we're going to see more listings over the next few days, few weeks, and going forward too. If your student really has specifics about the off-campus housing that they're searching for, so if they need a specific location really central on campus, they have really specific amenities that they need in housing, they might want to look a little bit earlier in that time frame to find more housing options for them to consider. Now, if they have more flexibility, so if they're more flexible on location or flexible on those amenities, and looking for maybe just like a base apartment or a house or maybe some flats in houses, they have that flexibility, then they can have more flexibility in that time frame as well for their search. We do help your student just get acquainted with this variety of different types of housing through our housing fair. So we do have a housing fair that is this Monday, October 2nd, 3 to 6 p.m. in Union South, Varsity Hall on the second floor. So encourage your student to go to there. We're going to have a lot of campus partners. We'll also have a lot of campus or off-campus properties as well as university housing there as well, just to help your student kind of get an idea of what type of housing is available and what type of resources and services are available to them. So talking a little bit about just the resource that I mentioned before, our campus area housing website. So that's at campusareahousing.wisc.edu. That's also a great spot for your student to look at for the first time to kind of just get an idea of those types of properties that are in the near campus area. Not all properties list with us, but a good number do. They can also use that to see some basic renter education videos. We have a roommates board and a sublet board too. So if your student's looking to connect with roommates in the future, they can go and log in with their net ID. That's their campus login, and connect with others in the UW community on both those boards. They can advertise sublets for free as well. So if in the future they have a long-term lease and maybe they're not going to be here over the summer, or they have an internship or they're studying abroad and they need to sublet the current unit that they have or a room in there, they can advertise that listing for free on our website using their net ID and using that subleases tab. We also have a lot of referral information, such as like our rental resource guide, and a lot of the content that I'm talking about today can be found on that website too. So next, I'm going to talk a bit about before signing a lease. So on the next slide, it starts with make sure that your student is meeting and discussing with all of their potential roommates in a safe way, but also discussing what their living expectations are. So making a list of their priorities of location, amenities, just setting that expectation so everybody is on the same page as they're going through that housing search process. So we see anything from furnished units to non-furnished units. Like I mentioned before, there's houses, there's more traditional basic apartments, there's very student-oriented apartments with a lot of like student-oriented amenities, maybe fitness facilities or study spaces or student events that are going on in those. So encourage them to tour a variety of units so they can experience and get an idea of what it might be like living in one of those. Also, we encourage that every single roommate looks at the unit that they would potentially be signing a lease at. So we don't want any surprises when it comes to move-in. We want everybody to be on the same page and everybody to have transparency with all the roommates. So make sure that every potential roommate is actually touring the unit. We also recommend that if possible, they look at the actual unit that they would be living in and not just a model unit. Model units are great to get an idea about furnishings, kind of picturing yourself living there, but you also want your student to look at the actual unit if that's available so that they can, see if there's any existing damage or just see if the floor plans differ, and just know what they're signing a lease at and know the specific unit that they're signing that lease for. As I mentioned before, on our website, there is that rental resource guide, which is really valuable and has a lot of this information on there. But there's also included in that this apartment touring checklist, and that QR code will take you there. So that's a great resource to provide to your student if they're going to tour a unit for the first time by themselves. It has things that might not be top of mind for your student in their first apartment search. It has things like checking light switches, flushing toilets, checking cell phone reception, also bringing along a cell phone charger and make sure outlets work. Just those things that might not be top of mind to really share with your student. And that's a great place to start. And they can go through that and actually just check off the boxes as they ask those questions and tour those units. I'm going to talk next a little bit about budgeting. So your student will likely need to provide a security deposit in order to secure the unit. The Tenant Resource Center coming up a little bit later on can talk a little bit more about that, but just know that that will likely be coming up while your student is signing that lease. But there are some things that may or may not be included within your student's rent per month. The first being internet. So there's two main internet providers, usually AT&T and Spectrum, near campus. I really recommend if your student does not have internet included within their lease or within their rent each month, to just compare the performance and compare the options and compare the price and have your student choose what's best for their needs. And then utilities, so gas and electric and heat, that is not required by the landlord in Wisconsin to be included within the monthly rent amount or included within the lease. So that can differ depending on if a property decides to include it or not. The price per month could vary. Madison Gas and Electric, they are the utilities provider for most of the properties that are near campus. And they have an average energy use and cost tool on their website where you can go in or your student can go in and put in the specific address and unit number, and it'll give for the last 12 months an average breakdown of what the utilities cost was at that unit. So if they're looking into maybe a older house or maybe a little bit older apartment compared to a new one that isn't as energy efficient and the gas electric is not included, those utilities are not included in that rent, that's a great way to just get an idea before signing that lease of what the total all-in cost might be for the rent. Also, just parking. So you likely already know, but a car is not needed to experience UW-Madison. And there, because we're at Isthmus, is really limited parking. So typically parking is not included within rent for the properties. So if your student does in the future need to have a car near campus, they can check with the property to see if there's parking spots available for an additional monthly fee, or a nearby property for an additional monthly fee too, but it's typically not going to be included within your student's rent. And just a few other things I just wanted to note. So it's good to talk with your student whether laundry is included or laundry is in unit, or whether it's coin operated or in the building, or whether they're going to need to be utilizing like a laundromat and what fees might be associated with that. Also, if they plan to bring a pet to their off-campus property, talking about pet fees, there might be a monthly pet fee and a pet deposit, but they'll also have to pay for that as well, depending on the lease. And then just making note whether the unit is furnished, whether it's not furnished. If it is furnished, what else would your student need to bring? Make sure they're talking with their roommates as you get closer, as we go out through the year, who plans to bring what, who's kind of accumulating what furniture if it's not furnished, or who's going to be bringing some small appliances if those aren't included. Just good things to be thinking about as your student is connecting with those roommates and going through this search process. I'm going to just briefly talk about move in, move out, knowing that this is a bit down the road, but make sure that your student puts in their phone or in their calendar the date and time that their lease says for when they can pick up their keys or their move-in date, and maybe set a reminder a month out or so they're not kind of just trying to file through their paperwork to find that pretty pertinent information. It's just nice to have it plugged in their calendar already while they're signing that lease. But when it comes to move in, your student, that security deposit that I mentioned before, they will be provided a check-in form. And that check-in form is going to detail each room. It's going to detail appliances. Your student should go through really thoroughly with their roommate and mark any existing damages that might be existing there, take photos, take videos as they're doing that of anything to note, in order to just protect that security deposit that your student provided in the future, so that they're not charged for any pre-existing damages that are there. Renter's insurance is something to be aware of. In most properties near campus and just in general, most rental properties require proof of renter's insurance when it comes to move-in. So just thinking about those things after they've signed a lease of who are they going to secure, how are they going to go about that renter's insurance. UW-Madison has a partnership with American Family Insurance. Your students can receive a 5% discount by using them. What renter's insurance does cover is your student's personal property within the unit. So their laptops or electronics and just all their personal items in case of damage or just anything that might come up with that. So typically those prices of that renter's insurance, to go back to that budgeting, sits between $15 and $20 a month, depending on the policy. Next, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some resources for just living off campus in general. So some common questions that we get are, can students living off campus use the dining halls? Yes, students living off campus can use the dining halls. The next question typically is there a meal plan available for off-campus students? So like the on-campus meal plan, there is not that same meal plan available or meal plan available for students living off campus in the dining halls. They have a couple different options that they can do. So they can use credit and debit card at any of the dining halls, but they can also use money that's been loaded onto their WIS card. That's their student ID. They can use that at the dining halls as well as other restaurants in the Wisconsin Union building, so Union South and Memorial Union, and some other convenience and restaurants around the campus, around campus as well. They'll receive a discount by using the money loaded on that list card. So they receive about a 5% discount for using that at the dining halls, and they also aren't charged sales tax with that. So it does create that discount for them that they would not receive if they're using their debit or credit cards, but your student can use all the dining halls that we have on campus while they're living in an off-campus property. There are also a number of just grocery stores and other off-campus food options for your student. Many of the grocery stores are really accessible by walking, biking, or bus. We're also not far from like the Hilldale shopping area where your student can get on a bus and go down to Target and a few other shopping centers there that are just a short bus ride away if they need to use that. That leads me a little bit into how do students get to class while living off campus. So I know I mentioned before that an off-campus property doesn't mean it's going to be far from where your student has classes. So it's probably pretty similar to how they're commuting to class right now. So they may be walking, they may be biking. There's also a B-cycle program that's set up around the downtown and campus area where your student can pay either a daily or monthly fee or an annual fee and rent a electric bicycle and go from station to station with those bikes if that's something that they're interested in. They can also commute by bus. So we have 4 main campus bus routes that run kind of throughout the day in the near campus area and do a loop around campus. And then your student will also receive, it's included within their tuition fees. They can pick it up at the first few weeks of classes each semester, but a City of Madison bus pass. So that City of Madison bus pass that they pick up will allow them to go to any area and take any bus in the Madison and greater Madison area. So even if they're living just a little bit further from campus, there might be a City of Madison bus that they can just step onto, use that bus pass, and it might drop off really close to the building where they have their classes in. So they can use like Google Maps as they're putting in addresses for properties that they're interested in their touring at to see the buses and the bus routes and the bus times that might go through there. So that's a great way to get an idea of that. And then to see those main campus routes that I mentioned before, they can go to map.wisc.edu and see those bus routes as well. And then just talking again about student parking, as I mentioned, a car is not needed to experience UW or even in the near campus area. But if your student has an internship or maybe an off-campus job or just something that requires them to have a vehicle near campus, they can find some parking options. So some of those long-term parking options on our website, campusareahousing.wisc.edu. We have a parking tab that they can log into. They can see on a map where those parkings are and what the rental or the monthly rent price would be for a parking spot there. Lastly, I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about financial aid. So we get a question that is, can financial aid be used to pay for off-campus housing? And yes, financial aid can be used to pay for off-campus housing. So for any financial award that your student receives, the university will first use that to cover tuition and fees, and then refund the rest to the student. And that refund can be used for educational expenses and purposes. And off-campus housing is considered one of those educational expenses. So it's important to just remind your students to complete their FAFSA each year, be aware of the deadlines, and just be diligent on submitting that. And if you have any questions based on your student's specific financial package, we really recommend that they connect with the Office of Student Financial Aid. Their website is financialaid.wisc.edu/contact, and you can find their phone number, their email, and contact forms there.
All right, the information Joe just shared is excellent and is really a great how-to guide for students and families. I'm going to take a few minutes now to address some of the additional questions that we field from students and families. The big one, of course, is budget. Joe talked a little bit about how to budget, but one of the questions we get asked a ton is, what is an average budget for housing, or what is the average rent in Madison? We honestly can't answer this. There are so many factors that go into it. And also there are a lot of properties that have yet to list their rates for 24-25. So for families who want some type of measuring stick, I always suggest to look at the housing and meals line in the UW estimated cost of attendance. This will just give you at least something to kind of look at. I think we all sort of know that many families have a bit of sticker shock when looking at rents for some of the student-focused high amenity properties that are near central campus. I just want to remind all of you, these are just a small selection of what's available. Common ways that we see students stretch their budget is to do things like share a bedroom and look for some economy of scale. For example, in a lot of cases, a 5-bedroom apartment with 5 people is more economical than a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 people. Joe mentioned this a little bit, but search for places a little further from campus. I know students and families always cringe at this, but remember, if your student's living in Whitty Hall right now and is going to the engineering campus, that's a 20-minute walk. They're living in the Desjop Residence Hall and they are going to humanities, which is a common building for a lot of first-year classes. That's a 25-minute walk. So these students, your students are used to going 20 minutes to get places. And as Joe said, every student is able to get a free Madison Metro bus pass. So one of the things that I encourage is when you're looking at different places, make sure you see how close it is to a bus stop. Another common question that we receive is that my student hasn't met their people yet, or they haven't met anybody they want to live with. This is not uncommon, and it's totally okay. There will be options as time goes on. There's a whole lot of students signing leases right now whose plans change as the year progresses. So this creates opportunities for students. Perhaps somebody is signing a lease now and plans to fill it with roommates as they meet people. People's plans change. They may release the place, offer a new lease. There's still plenty available in the spring with these sort of options. So again, your student should not feel upset if they haven't met the people they want to live with. I would encourage your students to continue to take advantage of opportunities to meet new people through classes, clubs. University Housing's Late Night Wisconsin series or Wisconsin Late Night series has been very popular for students living in the res halls, and it's a really great way to connect with other students who are probably also looking for housing. If your student is truly distressed by waiting or just feels like they can't, there are plenty of studio and 1-bedroom options available, and there are off-campus properties that do offer roommate matching. So having said all this, let's remember a lease is a legally binding document. It's the first step our Badgers are going to take to build their own personal credit and rent history. And parents and families, many of us are going to be the guarantor on this lease. So this leads really nicely into our next topic. Jimena, would you share with families information about their students' rights as tenants and provide some guidance on leases?
Yes, definitely. So again, my name is Jimena. I'm part of the Tenant Resource Center. So a little bit about us. We have a few different programs, and I'll get into the nitty-gritty of leases and all that comes with being a tenant. But a little bit about us, we have different programs at the Tenant Resource Center. The first one is the Housing Counseling Program, or the department, I guess. We offer, as housing counselors, we can do walk-ins with tenants. So if you come to us, you want to talk through any situation that's going on, see what resources we can offer, and give you some details about your rights and responsibilities. EDDP stands for Eviction Defense and Diversion Partnership. Currently they help more specifically with court-involved tenants. So if you're ever facing eviction court, our EDDP program can help with potential legal representation, rental assistance, mediation, things like that. We offer sample forms and letters at the Tenant Resource Center. They're on our website, or you could come visit us and we can talk through it. Things like the roommate agreement, security deposit, payment plan, things of that nature. We do a lot of community outreach, so we love going to festivals, fairs. We also do outreach at apartments, so keep an eye out for us in the community. We also have a campus office. Currently, I'm actually at the Student Activity Center Our location can vary, but we are here Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So you can stop in, talk a little bit about what's going on. We also have hours on Saturdays at the Madison College campus. In case, you have a busy schedule at school, Saturdays might be a little bit more free. One big thing about the Tenant Resource Center is that we offer information and not advice, but we do have an attorney referral list because a lease, as mentioned before, is a legally binding contract. And so we do have those connections to attorneys so you can get some advice. So some questions about a lease. What is a lease? A lease is a contract. It is a legally binding one, and it comes with obligations, responsibilities, and rights. So contract law does apply to a lease. For disclosure requirements, I know it can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So landlord, property manager, who is who. It is in the law that a landlord is supposed to disclose to tenants in writing who can collect rent, who is doing management at the apartment. So just keep an eye out for those important names in writing for sure. Some void and unenforceable clauses. As you're going through your lease, it's really important to read through all of it. I know they can get a little bit long sometimes, but it is there are some certain clauses in your lease that may make the whole lease void and unenforceable. At the Tenant Resource Center, we wouldn't be able to interpret your lease for you, but we would be able to tell you what's in the statutes and what could make those void and unenforceable. But again, just mentioning the attorneys, they would be able to tell you if your lease is void. So because it is a legally binding contract, even if you have not moved into the unit, once you have signed it, you do hold that responsibility to either break it or uphold that lease. And that includes your co-signers as well. A lot of parents are co-signers or, guardians, things like that. Co-signers are held liable for all the same things that a tenant is held liable for. So making sure that everybody's aware as to what's on the lease, making sure that you go through that lease carefully. With that being said, it's always important to keep a copy of your lease, and your landlord can deliver that electronically. Just to keep an eye out for how long your lease is. It could be for a year long or month to month. There are different types of terms, so making sure that you keep an eye out on that. For joint and several liability, so when you're going into this contract or lease with friends, other students, roommates, when you're going into it as a joint and severally liable tenant, each tenant is responsible for the full amount of rent. So if your roommate doesn't pay your rent or doesn't pay their part of the rent, everyone on the lease will be held responsible for it. And that's up to the landlord if they want to say, like, you guys can split it, or, I'm going to point to that person, they are responsible for it. That's when roommate agreements definitely come in handy. So making sure that if you're signing the lease together or if you have a separate contract. So that can be more common in student housing, wherein each tenant is responsible for their part of the rent. That way, they are the ones that are the only ones responsible for the rent and anything on the lease. That also applies to eviction. If they are responsible for their part of the rent payment or of the lease, then they would be the only ones to get that eviction notice, and the other tenants wouldn't be penalized. So with all of this roommate talk, having that roommate agreement is very important, making sure that everyone signs it, everybody knows what their responsibilities are, what bills they're sharing, which bills they're not sharing, household duties, making sure that you keep a clean and safe environment for everybody, as being a renter is a big responsibility and can entail a lot of different things. When you're looking at going into an apartment, as a student, you may be looking into subletting. at some point in your semester. So we encourage to explore all other options before subletting, because subletting can get a little bit tricky, and that is because there are two types of subletting. One is where both of the original tenant and the subtenant become joint and severally liable for the entire lease. So again, if the sublessor defaults on rent, then the original tenant would be held liable for that. Another version is where the original tenant becomes kind of like the landlord. They follow all the landlord laws, holding that sublessor accountable. I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit fast. I'm just trying to make sure I get through all these slides. As for application fees, since we are nearing that time of submitting your applications, here are some things to look out for. So for earnest money, that's a really good quote right there. It's the total of any payments given to the landlord before you get into that rental agreement, or in return of getting into that rental agreement. That is not money that you get back, but the security deposit is. So we'll get into security deposit later. But for an application fee, some things to watch out for are the up to $25 credit check, as well as up to $25 background check. So for a background check, we do in Wisconsin have a lot of students coming in from other states. They can ask for this background check. So just keep an eye out for it. For these checks, for these checks, you can ask for a copy of it for specifically the credit check. If you're able to make copies of these at the library or even at the Tenant Resource Center at our home office, you can use that same credit check within 30 days. So if you're applying to a bunch of different places, you can turn that same credit check in and and avoid that fee. So additionally, when an application is denied, you must get that application fee refunded. So whether it was $25 or $50 or anything less than that, if your application was denied, you should get that back. Make sure that if you don't get it back right away, that you're asking for it in writing. Keep dates on. We always encourage a paper trail. If your application is accepted and you sign a lease, then the fee must be returned, or it can be applied to a security deposit or rent. So making sure that you also have that agreement in writing, that can be really helpful, just so you know where your money's going. Lastly, an application, if an application is accepted, but you decide to not rent there, you can, if you don't withdraw the application beforehand, the landlord can make deductions for their damages. So, for the processing fees, all that stuff, from that fee that you paid earlier. So some application questions and screenings: social security number and driver's license number. Those are commonly asked for, and that is for the purpose of background and credit checks. So it is not that anyone's trying to steal your identity, just making sure that you do, you make sure who you're sending this information to, as it is valuable information. In addition, with other application questions, if you feel that you're being discriminated against, that can definitely happen. We can offer some resources for that, like talking to the Fair Housing Council or the City of Madison Department of Civil Rights. And it really helps if you know what other tenants are being asked, like which questions they're being asked for the application process. If you notice that you're getting asked many different questions, or it's a little excessive, or you feel uncomfortable wondering, or you can ask if other tenants are being asked those same questions to see if there's any discrimination going on. So moving on to repairs, both the landlord and the tenant have some responsibilities on this. So making sure that your landlord is keeping up with their responsibility to keep the unit and common areas in safe and habitable condition. There are some key points in there, like the heat must be able to reach 67 degrees in the middle of the room. Especially in the winter time, keep an eye out for this. Sometimes students leave for winter break and, there can be frozen or burst pipes, things like that. So just making sure that these things are kept up throughout your lease term. Making sure also that you're in good communication with your landlord. So the tenant you can be charged as a tenant if you're at fault for the repair that needs to be completed, even though it may be like a little bit embarrassing, like you've moved the door in and accidentally made a hole in the wall. Still ask for that repair. I know it can be bothersome to get that charge, but if it gets to be a bigger problem, then that whole bigger problem will fall under your damage. With that being said, there are other cases in which a repair is not your fault. For example, like pests or common areas. These are also really good to inform your landlord about because they have to fulfill that responsibility in any case, and making sure that they know what they have to fix, giving them a timeline if they don't make that for themselves. This is also helpful to keep that communication going so that you know what fees are coming your way, and making sure that you're not being overcharged or undercharged. As a tenant, you do hold some responsibilities like for minor maintenance, changing batteries in like the smoke detector, light bulbs, informing your landlord when you're leaving for an extended time period, burst pipes, things like that. We really like to emphasize communication, especially in writing, to create that paper trail, just so that you know your timeline has been when you're submitting repair requests, things of that nature. As I mentioned before, and you can see in the next slide, an issue that wasn't your fault to begin with could become your fault if it gets any worse. So we can skip to the security deposit slide. So this one is a really big one. It's important to fill out that check-in form. You do have to receive that in the first 7 days of your tenancy. Be as thorough as you can. We encourage photos, videos, all of that good stuff, and making sure that you keep a copy of your check-in form. On our website, like I mentioned before, we do have a copy of a check-in form, we do have a sample check-in form that you can use. There are some lawful charges that a landlord may charge for. That's tenant damage, unpaid rent, utilities that become the responsibility of a landlord after you move out, and non-standard rental provisions. It's really important to look at these non-standard rental provisions before you sign, because there may be some things in there that you could ask a lawyer about that may require some extra attention. There are some fees in there sometimes, so making sure that you look over that. Some unlawful charges are normal wear and tear and routine carpet cleaning. So things that are being done after each tenant moves in and moves out, you can't be charged those. And we have a sample form as well for when your security deposit is wrongfully withheld. So a landlord must provide an itemized list of deductions. So once you do receive that security deposit back, or if you don't receive one back and you're curious as to what that money went into, you are supposed to receive that within 21 days after your lease ends. So it's really important to provide that forwarding address. Otherwise, they can send it right back to the last known address, which is where you were living in that unit. So for property left behind, when you do move out of that unit, if the lease says so, your landlord can dispose of that property. So again, making sure you go thoroughly through that lease, understanding what their property left behind is, and informing your landlord when you're leaving for extended periods of time, so that they don't think that you abandoned the unit, or like that you never signed your renewal and you're leaving some things, or if you're going out of town, something like that. making sure you know about property left behind that can be stated in their lease uniquely, or they can dispose of it. With that being said, medications and medical equipment, if you leave any of that behind, that does have to be held for 7 days. So just making sure that you keep in contact with your landlord that you're going to come pick it up, or that they can throw it away, whatever the arrangement is. Lastly, for eviction and termination, I know that eviction can be kind of a scary topic, but most important thing is that eviction notices can be given for non-payment of rent or for a lease violation. So we always encourage people to reply to an eviction notice, whether it's a 5-day, 14-day, 13-day, and whether you're agreeing or disputing the eviction notice. Like it says on here, it does not mean that you have to move out within 5 days. If you get a 5-day notice, it just means that you have the option to fix the lease violation or the non-payment of rent, or you can vacate the unit, but you are still held liable for that money. The landlord, of course, must follow the state laws on the eviction process. So if you are facing an illegal eviction, like you got locked out or somebody else is removing your items, somebody that's not the sheriff, you can definitely call the police and get that figured out. As for terminating your lease, there are a couple different options. You can break your lease, which is essentially just sending a letter to your landlord saying, hey, I'm breaking my lease. This is my move out date. This is my forwarding address, and here are my keys. In that instance, you are still held liable for rent and utilities until the unit is re-rented or until the lease term is over, whichever comes first. And you usually receive that bill at the end of that term. Or a mutual agreement for termination of tenancy. This is when you have a meeting with your landlord and you just talk about what terms you can come to so that you're not held responsible for that rent and utilities until the unit is re-rented or the lease term is over. And just make sure that if you do go that route, that you get a written agreement so that there is no confusion there. And lastly is subletting, but we've already gone through that. But yeah, just making sure that terminating a lease is always an option. So there are ways to do that. And if a landlord tells you that that is not the case, it definitely is. So just keeping that in mind. Lastly, this last slide is just where to find us, how to contact us. And yeah, thank you.
Our students are lucky to have access to the Tenant Resource Center. When I get asked questions about lease or tenant rights, I always refer students and families to the Tenant Resource Center. They're definitely the experts in this area, and they're staffed by kind and compassionate people ready to educate and guide our young adults. Let's also remember that when our Badgers enter into a lease, they have a responsibility to be a partner in their tenant and landlord relationship. Abby, can you please share advice for us to guide our Badgers in being a supportive member of the tenant-landlord relationship? All right. We have lost Abby's. There's Miss Abby.
Yes.
Take it away, Abby.
Sorry, we're hosting open house right now, and I just heard a big group walk in, which probably means that they just took a little bit of my Wi-Fi stream, but that's okay. Well, cool. So thank you for the introduction and for allowing me to be here. My name is Abby Zellner. I am the Director of Leasing and Marketing for LZ Management. So that probably means nothing to most of you, but we manage and operate Grand Central and Exo One apartments, which is off-campus housing, but as Joe was mentioning, that doesn't really mean anything about where it's located geographically. Just for your guys' reference, Grand Central is right across the street from the chemistry building, and Exo One is right across the street from the business school. So just because of our location, we definitely get a lot of traffic from students. And we've been open, Grand Central opened in 2009, Exo One opened in 2013. So we've definitely been around for some time. This is not our first rodeo of leasing. And I can tell you, I lived at Exo One the year it opened in 2013. And I signed my lease in October the year before I moved in. So this is just really unique to Madison. This isn't new necessarily. This is kind of how this campus has always done things. Not saying that it's ideal, but anyways, Erin asked me to talk about some things, just about like some advice of how to help your student have a really smooth transition into private housing and a good experience. And so I asked my team, my number one piece of advice was, we know that you love your students very much, and we know that you want to make sure they're taken care of, but we need to communicate with them. So I know sometimes there's some confusion of how the lease works, who co-signs, etc. So the people that are going to actually sign the lease are going to be your students and their roommates. And then you, as the parent, typically are the ones that are going to co-sign. I cannot speak to every management company, but I know that we really only like to involve co-signers once it would get to a point of like people aren't paying rent and we need to go to court. We really want to be communicating with your student, the one who is the leaseholder. And there are some instances where one parent co-signed and not the other, and the other is trying to get some information. And since we have no record of that parent, we can't disclose information, and there gets to be a lot of frustration. So the more you can encourage your student to come down and talk to their property managers, that would be appreciated, get their questions answered. The second thing, I really want to reiterate what pretty much everyone in this panel has talked about. Leases are legally binding documents. Again, can't speak for every management company, but I know we really do not want surprises. We want everybody moving in knowing exactly where they're going, who their roommates are, what time they're moving in, what their expectations are. As Jimena was saying, like, you know, there are some things that the tenants need to be responsible for, and there's some things that the landlords need to be responsible for. So it's important to make sure they understand all of those things. Another thing that one of my coworkers actually just said this morning was, in case a lot of you don't know, windowless bedrooms are pretty common in the Madison area. So there is a chance that your student may be in an apartment and they may have a bedroom that doesn't have a window. It doesn't mean it's against code. It doesn't mean it's unsafe. Everything's up to code. It's just there's a lot of demand, so we gotta have plenty of units and beds for people to live in. So yeah. Okay, other things to know. This demand is unprecedented for us too. This is new for us. So please, if you could remind your students to be a little bit patient with us. Most of the management companies around here, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of them are small teams. And so they do their best to get through the paperwork and through everything and respond as quick as they can. But they're just like the university gets a lot of questions every day. So do we. And so we do our best. So yeah, beyond that, we really want, at least our philosophy is, we really want to have a partnership with your student. We are not out to get them. I can't speak for every landlord and management company, but we want to make a partnership. Ultimately, at the end of the lease, your student moves out and we still have the building. We want to make sure our building is still in good shape when the next group moves into that unit. And so, you know, the toilet's clogged. I know, like Jimena was saying, sometimes it's embarrassing, but like if it's overflowing, we gotta get in there and get it fixed. So kind of helping coach your student on those kinds of things of like, you know, what to and not necessarily reach out to management for, you know, like Jimena said, anything in the lease is going to be in there, etc. But from what I have experienced, most management companies would much prefer people just come talk to them and just work things out with them. That's what I can speak to, at least. And then beyond that, I know there's a lot of anxiety about looking for roommates. This is super early, et cetera, et cetera. I know I said this is not new, but still it does happen. I will tell you, at least at Grand Central and Exo One, we allow people to sign a lease and add roommates in later. So we'll have, let's say, a 4-bedroom unit. We'll have some people that'll say, I'm going to sign it. I have 3 friends. We're like, the 3 of us are going to live here. We're going to add a roommate on later. That happens all the time. That happens every year. So don't be super worried, as Erin was saying too, if your student hasn't found their besties yet that they want to live with. That's going to be okay. And then also speaking to those joint individual leases, there are pros and cons that go along with both. So just make sure you understand what and your student is going to understand what that means. So joint leases, yes, you as the co-signer technically are responsible if everybody, you know, decides not to pay rent. It does come back to you. That being said, one I think is a benefit to the joint leases is, let's say someone's studying abroad for a semester and they want to have a subletter come in for that semester. On a joint lease, all the roommates are going to have to agree to that is a specific individual living there. Whereas on an individual lease, they don't necessarily have to do that. They don't necessarily need everyone's permission. So there are some things that go along with that. Again, I don't think that there's necessarily one that's better or worse. It's just different, and just being prepared and understanding what you're really getting into. Yeah. And so lastly, I know that there are some questions about furnishings. And so when we say furnished, we don't mean that like bed sheets and pillows and silverware and dishes and everything are going to be in there. Typically what people are talking about is each bedroom will have a bed, a desk, and a desk chair. The living room will have a couch. You'll have bar stools, that kind of stuff. So you typically, when they say it's furnished, it's going to mean like bigger furniture items. But again, as everyone has been saying, and I want to just reiterate, just make sure they're understanding what exactly they're getting into before they're signing any leases. Absolutely, they should go take a tour. They should absolutely look at reviews that are on the websites. I would encourage them to ask questions about, when something goes wrong, what happens, because buildings are buildings. things go wrong. It's out of our control. So it's really more about, how does management respond? Are you left waiting for days on end with no reaction? Are they on it right away? Etc. And then lastly, the last thing I want to touch on is application process. You're going to hate this answer, and I'm very sorry to tell it to you, but every company is probably going to have a different process and different requirements. And so what I would encourage is your student to make short lists and backups of like, these are all my options that I would consider, and go from there. Just because if you're trying to make a whole spreadsheet of how everything works at all these different places, I think it would be too much. And you guys are busy. So yeah, but Erin, I think that's kind of all I have that I wanted to share. So thanks again for including me.
Sure. So thank you, Abby, and thank you to all our panelists for your awesome information. Families, I know we've covered a lot, and I know we're out of time, but there are a couple things, if you could hang with me a couple minutes, that I want to make sure you know about. First of all, one of the questions that came in on the chat, I think, is a good one. Alyssa, we had a couple of families ask if you have an estimate of how many residence hall spots will be held for returning students?
Yeah, good question. This is one of our most common questions. We are still working on getting the answer for this. So I can speak to what we did in the last year. So last year was the first year that we did have that limit on returning students. And we held about 1,000 spaces. So in years past, before we had to limit returning student numbers, we typically did see about 800 to 1,000 returners. And so we had about 1,000 returner spaces held last year. This does not guarantee that everyone who requests it will be given that opportunity to live on campus. We did have a significant number of students on the waiting list last year, but we do continue to go back to that waiting list if more spaces open up. So last year was about 1,000, but we do not have that number determined yet for the upcoming academic year.
Thank you. One of the other questions that we saw come in had to do with, can you use your 529 college savings plan to pay for off-campus housing? The answer is typically yes. What I will tell you is that you should look at your personal plan or talk to your financial advisor. From my mom's standpoint here, I do use a 529 account to pay for my students' off-campus housing. My plan was able to explain exactly how I knew how much I could use for it, and gave me tips and advice for how to do it or how often to draw the money out. So speak to your personal plan about that, but in general, yes, it can be used. So to sort of wind up, since I know we're over time, this session is recorded. You can rewatch it again anytime at the same link. And I want to remind all of you of a few dates that we've talked about here. The student housing fair, as Joe mentioned, is Monday. It's a great, really low stakes way for your students to come through and talk to some property managers. I just think it's just, low pressure. They could all use a little low pressure right now. I want to let you guys know about the October Badger Family Forum, which is happening next Friday, October 6th from noon to 1. The topic is going to be campus safety, and we're going to be joined by UW Police Chief Roman. If you haven't met her, she's wonderful, and she will be there to help give some information on safety. And finally, there will be a Live with Bucky on Tuesday, October 17th. The topic of that Live with Bucky is going to be returning to the residence halls. So if that's something your student is interested in, that's a great session to join in on. And Alyssa and her team will be able to dig into hopefully some more details, and at least remind you and your students of those dates. I just want to reiterate one final time that we're here to provide support to you and your students. If you did not get your question answered today, or if you think of follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email. It is that off-campus email that was, that's shared on the slide right now, and that was shared earlier in the presentation. I gave the websites here for some of our presenters and the resources that they mentioned. And I also want to add a quick note that the Badger Parent and Family October newsletter will be out next week. And there will be some additional information in that newsletter, some repeats of what we've talked about today, but also some additional information. Okay. I feel like we covered a lot. I hope it was helpful. We're happy to help you guys. Thank you to our panelists, our presenters. Like I said, these are the experts I used for my own Badgers. I'm thrilled that they were able to take time out and help all of us. And so with that, thank you for joining us, and on Wisconsin.